Hello friends, and welcome once again to the Gesundheit Kitchen. I am always happy to spend some time with my dear friend and sidekick, or mine might be your sidekick, depending on the situation, but Dr. Ellen Steinberg. And you know, I know enough to be dangerous sometimes, and I try to read and I try to stay on top of things, but sometimes I need it sort of splained to me. Dr.
Happy to explain.
Yeah, so Dr. Explain it to me, but also in a way that is not above my head, because so many of these medical things, I mean, you have to learn a new language to even read some of the things out there. So anytime you and I can have a conversation to kind of break these things down helps me, and hopefully then helps the person that's watching. So I keep seeing this this term. I've heard of processed foods, but now they're UPFs, which I thought was like a mixed martial arts thing, but I've learned means ultra processed food. And then I've even heard the term ultra processed foods. So give me the elevator pitch on what are we talking about?
Okay, I would like to start with an example, and I think it will explain what an ultra processed food is.
Okay.
Let's start with an unprocessed food, a tomato.
Okay.
Nothing's been done to it. That is a whole food.
Right.
Let's say they chop it, add nothing to it, and put it in a can so that you could have diced tomatoes.
Okay.
That's a processed food.
Right.
It's been chopped, nothing's been added, but it has, quote, been processed.
It had to be heat, sealed, ready. Yeah, exactly.
Yep,
Sure.
chopped, all of that.
Right.
Then let's say from the diced tomatoes, they make a spaghetti sauce. That now has become an ultra processed food because not only have they chopped the tomatoes, but now they've added sugars and oils and all of that. So by thinking of that tomato example, you kind of can understand how you can have something that's processed, which none of this is bad.
Sure.
But if you're wanting to think about it in terms of better, you know, good, bad, better, or whatever, processed is one thing, ultra processed is another. And one more thing I'd like to add is that typically with ultra processing, not only do they add, but they may also subtract.
Right. That's a great point. And to that end, I think oftentimes the intention behind the ultra processing isn't necessarily to make it amazing. It's to make it shelf stable.
Definitely.
To make it where it can last for a long time, you know, either refrigerated, frozen, or shelf stable, and also inexpensive for the manufacturer. That's the main priority, but also for the consumer. So oftentimes it is cheaper to buy canned diced tomatoes than it is to buy a fresh tomato.
Correct.
So it almost creates this situation where they're incentivizing us, and not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, they're growing so many tomatoes, we can't always buy them fresh. They want to maximize the utility of the harvest, and I get that. That's sort of the history of preserving and canning and those kind of things. But it has grown to such an industrial scale that health is on the list, but maybe not high on the list, priority-wise.
And I'm glad you said the word incentivize, because basically the product does do that. As you said, you know, fresh is one thing, processed different, but an ultra processed food, I always think of that example of the Twinkie, the joke that you can leave a Twinkie out for a year and it won't ever change.
Is that a joke? I mean, really?
It's probably not a joke.
That's what I mean. It's probably
we'll have to try
reality.
that next.
Exactly.
We'll leave one right here and check out in a year. But seriously, when they are processed, ultra processed like that, it tends to last a lot longer. Again, so much. Let's think about orange juice. I'm going from topic to topic, but if you have an orange and then you have orange juice, fresh squeezed orange juice, you're still going to have a little pulp in there. Ultra processed, like a concentrate orange juice, now you've removed the fiber and everything else. So again, it's kind of a scale, but incentivized being that, let's face it, ultra processed foods taste good. Yeah. I mean, if you're wanting something sweet, you're wanting something satisfying, if you want something chewy, that's typically people's go-to.
And the fact that it's also convenient. So if you want to pick up a frozen meal, you know, everything has been done. It's been homogenized, pasteurized, sterilized. So any of the good bacteria, we've talked about probiotics and prebiotics and postbiotics. You know, all of those things have been either removed or rearranged in such a way that sometimes the body doesn't know what to do with it, or it gets absorbed almost like a bolus, like a punch in the gut. And one of the examples I heard was a cake mix. So is cake a bad food? Well, in the old days, yes, it's a process. There was a process. You had to mill the wheat, you had to crack the eggs, you had to milk the cows, but it was a collection of ingredients that could be identified from their original source. Still probably got to watch your sugars, got to watch your fats and those kind of things. But now if you buy a box of cake mix, it's, it's a collection of ultra refined, for to be shelf stable, to be inexpensive, to last 10 years. But when we eat that kind of a cake versus a homemade real ingredients cake, it goes into our system like an injection.
And that's another thing. There's some studies that show that people who eat whole foods, like if you were eating, whole wheat bread and vegetables and things of that nature, but the same, same quantities, a lot of quantity, and then those that eat the ultra processed people usually have about at least 500 calories more per day. One reason being they don't get full. Because think about it, all that fiber is gone.
Sure.
A lot of time, all the natural hydration is gone. And just your ability, and with no fiber, think about it, if you eat a pancake for breakfast, that's just a processed pancake versus maybe a whole wheat pancake with a little bit of nuts or something, you're gonna stay fuller longer with the whole wheat pancake. So, when you're talking about ultra processed, and I never villainize any food, everything has its place. But in terms of selecting, I would put the ultra processed on the list for a special time, or just really watch it and be mindful. So if you're gonna do it right, enjoy it, but be mindful of what you're doing.
Let it be like you said, the special occasion. It's the treat. And too often we get into this cycle of, instead of 1 out of 10, we're doing 9 out of 10, because it's convenient, it's easy, it's cheap. You got to feed the kids, you got to go to work, and we find ourselves eating these ultra processed foods. They're not labeled as such, right?
Right.
So we have to do our own little bit of homework, and there are some good lists. As I was kind of researching our conversation today, pretty much all of the big health sites have got lists of what are ultra processed foods, what things to be mindful of, and some of them say to avoid. And again, as you said, it's tough. You don't want to be the food police, right?
I think in all the times I've practiced, I've never said do not eat.
Yeah,
I mean, everything has its place. But to your point, there is a lot to be learned on that label. Have you heard of the 5-20 rule? 5%, 20%.
I have, but I can't remember what the ratio is.
So the 5-20 rule is very simple. It says that if something is not so good for you, such as sodium, fat, sugar, try to go for the look on the label. It should be 5% or less
of the total calories.
Of the total calories.
Got it.
Then, where it's something that's good for you, such as fiber, protein, those types of things, try to go for 20% or more.
Okay.
Specifically, fiber, protein. Those are the two that you really want to concentrate on. And also think about the fact that, as we've said, on the label, you were just talking about natural, naturally grown, all of
Sure.
it. None of those terms are the only thing that's really regulated is certified.
Okay.
So whether it's organic or not, naturally grown, everything grows naturally.
Sure.
So don't be pulled into
those flashy words.
Yes.
Yeah, which
absolutely.
sound good, and oftentimes there's a higher price tag associated with that. So I want to kind of zoom in really quickly. So for those that have already had a gastrectomy or partial gastrectomy, this is even more important, because oftentimes you're missing that stage where the stomach acid does a pretty good job of homogenizing things and kind of helping make it all before it goes into where food is digested. Well, these ultra processed foods, as I mentioned earlier, can hit your system like an injection. And for a guy without a stomach, or if you have a partial stomach, oftentimes it's a shorter route, right?
Absolutely.
So not only is the food going to be absorbed faster, our systems are just set up, these rearranged or redacted GI systems are set up to absorb foods quicker. So foods go into us quicker. So it's a little more, the impact on how we feel. It can cause dumping syndrome. It can cause those blood sugar spikes and crashes because we don't have that normal motility where things take time to move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. We're bypassing a couple of those stages. So even more important that you're mindful of, and keeping a food journal is such a boring task, and it feels like homework, and I fought that for a couple of years before I finally started making those connections and writing down, look, if I eat this boxed cake mix, and I feel like I'm picking on boxed cake mixes, But it seems like that versus a slice of cake from a homemade bakery, there was a huge difference on how it impacted me.
Exactly. Especially as you said, if you're becoming hypoglycemic and you're thinking, well, what did I do? The only way you'll know is by keeping a food diary, and it's so much easier to see the trends.
Right.
But again, there is a place for all of it. But as you said, without a stomach or partial stomach, things do go very quick.
Yep.
So if you eat a carbohydrate, you're going to have a sugar response very quickly. But if there's fiber in there, protein.
I am so team fiber. You have brought me. I've been shown the way, and I'm such an apostle. I am constantly talking about get your fiber.
Fiber.
I feel like I should get an extra tattoo that says fiber. And your advice to me on that, and I'm not just saying it because you're sitting right here, has genuinely changed not only how I feel, but also how I approach nutrition. I mean, in the best possible way. It gave me that full arsenal of, yes, they're all numbers on the can or the label or the box, but that's the number. The protein and the fiber are the two that you taught me to focus for. And
if you can have a protein with every meal, that is ideal. Again, it's going to really slow down that absorption rate.
Right.
We're, again, never saying don't eat anything, but the more people can avoid just that sugar with no fiber, added everything, food coloring, just think about it. When you read the label, if it's got 30 ingredients as opposed to maybe 10, I'd go for the one with 10.
No, I agree. Yeah. Even if there is a toy in the box. I mean, sometimes you have to make...
and especially when they're good. They are.
Exactly. Well, listen, it's always a pleasure. I always learn so much from you, and again, just these conversations, whether it's blood sugar or fiber or protein, it's so important, and it's not standard issue after a surgery like the kind that many of us have had. So I really appreciate you taking the time and being our coach on the sidelines with these things. It's
always my pleasure.
Invaluable.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, and thank everybody for tuning in. If you have questions, if there's an idea that you want us to explore, please take a second and drop us a note, let us know, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time at some other location for the Gesundheit Kitchen. Take care.